Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This is the June OANA, Old Astoria Neighborhood Association meeting. This is our first live meeting in 26 months. Thank you, thank you. And I know that we're going to continue with this, and while the group is small today, it's small, it is intimate, but I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions answered. This is really a unique situation. What we have here is a candidates forum for the brand new New York State Senate District 59, which was sort of created out of thin air because of the recent census. But it's an interesting, very interesting district because it goes from Astoria down through to Williamsburg and across to Kips Bay. So there's a lot of, this is sort of the migration that started way back when I was young in the West Village, moved to the East Village, moved to Williamsburg, moved up to Greenpoint, and right up here to Astoria. So it's an interesting story, and we have all brand new candidates. We have no incumbent, so I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to be trying to go over subjects that are based upon the Albany, about the state Senate issues, things that they're involved in. And also, before I do that, a couple things I'd like to discuss, though. First of all, I'd like everybody to know the biggest local issue here right now is the conversion of the bus lanes on 21st Street. That's a huge issue locally. And as the conversion is done, we would like everybody out there that's listening to keep in mind that we need input from you. We need to know what's going on. We want your observations. We want your thoughts, alteration possibilities, whatever, because we want to be the conduit to the city agency so that hopefully we can get changes and modifications if and when they're needed. We do hope that that's not the case. However, if in fact modifications are needed, this really affects our quality of life. This is the major artery that runs through our whole neighborhood. Okay, another thing that OANA has been advocating for is the cable companies to remove the wires after the service has ended. It's a tangled mess that covers the overhead on the whole neighborhood, in fact, all of New York. And I don't think there's any excuse for the fact that all this chaos that we have to live with all this chaos. So this is a point where corporate responsibility should come in. I think that eventually we would like to see every house here have a universal input, a universal cable going into it that each company can use. So if there is a change in service, they don't have to put in new cabling. This is sort of like with the trucking business. If you form a new trucking company, you don't have to build new roads. You use the same roads. So it's the same situation. So I think it makes perfect sense. Also, I'd like to announce that tomorrow there'll be an event at Variety Boys and Girls Club that we're co-sponsoring on the Equinox Wind event. It's about wind farms, and it's going to be 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at Variety Boys and Girls Club. I hope you check it out. Of other things, couple things of interest since our last meeting, Hallett's North passed 1,300 units, which is going up in our neighborhood. I'm not sure when it's going to start, but it's going to be next to the Whitey Ford Field and the Durst area down there in Hallett's Peninsula. And we're looking forward to finding responsible developers. We do hope so. And lastly, we were invited to the opening of the final terminal at LaGuardia Airport, the Delta terminal. That was really an exciting event. In general, we've been involved in this and had a lot of presentations from Gateway Partners. And frankly, it's a very impressive job that was done. So with that, we'd like to also introduce back in the booth, Victor Prado, who's handling our tech, and he's also donates his time. We'd like to thank the people from this church here, the family church, okay? And also I'd like to thank everybody that showed up. So, we'd like to start by introducing everybody that's on stage with us. Okay, first, we have Michael Corbett, Elizabeth Crowley, Kristen Gonzalez, okay, Nomiki, and Francoise. Okay, Francoise, okay. No, thank you, okay. Okay, so we'd like to ask questions here, and we'd like each one to give an answer. We'd like to give the answer in 2 minutes. So the first question will be on the Interborough Express.
Did you want us to introduce ourselves?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay.
I read that.
Yep, you're right. Okay.
I do my homework.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you each have your own microphones. Would you do that?
Me first. Hi, everyone. Mike Corbett. Glad to be here today, candidate for the state senate. You know, my path was not a traditional one. I did not graduate college. I've lived with an invisible disability since I was 9 years old. And I spent 15 years working as a commercial mover, Teamsters Local 814, 3 years as an officer, and was lucky enough to have my first job in government right here in Astoria, working for New York City Councilmember Costa Constantinides. I spent 5.5 years working with many folks, some of them who are in this room, very familiar faces. With participatory budgeting, we helped get a lot of things built in schools, some science labs. We did some work over at NYCHA, got some the libraries fixed, including the Astoria Library, which is not very far from here. So very proud of that work, and it's work that I'd love to continue. I think that there's a lot of things we can be doing. Things that I want to work on include workers' rights. We see all the organizing going on in places like Starbucks and Chipotle, and at Amazon. As a third-generation Teamster, I'm incredibly inspired by that work, and I want to make sure that those workers are protected and have the right to form and join a union should they choose. A lot of work that I did here with Councilmember Constantinides included work on the environment. That's things that I would love to work on. I think there's a lot more that we can do for the environment at the state level. We've done some great work here at the city, and I think we should take that statewide. And other things I want to work on include making sure that we actually do things for the folks at NYCHA. Cooking on a hot plate is not something that is that you can do for a family of four. And for the folks at Astoria Houses throughout the pandemic, I know that they were out of gas for months and months, and that's something I would love to work on. So this sort of overall theme of my campaign is nobody wins unless everybody wins. That was something that Bruce Springsteen talked about during his concerts, and it really means that until everybody's got a job that pays a living wage, until everybody's got food on the table, until everybody has a piece of what they call the American dream, nobody wins unless everybody wins. So I thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Before you start more, could you please have your microphones closer to your masks, since we have that membrane over your mouths? Thank you.
Is this good, Richard? You can hear me? Okay. Good evening. I want to thank Richard and your civic for putting tonight's candidates forum together. My name is Elizabeth Crowley, and I'm a former New York City council member. I was born and raised in Queens, born to a big family, the 14th of 15 children, and I've raised my sons as a single mom. I know the battle that so many of our families are facing today because I've lived it as a single mom. And when my sons were young, I remember having the difficulty of finding good childcare to make sure that I could get to work or school on time, and the money situation of having enough to pay for adequate housing and food and healthcare insecurity. Those same concerns are facing far too many of our families today. The cost of living is stifling. There's no greater issue than the cost of living and affordable housing. And I will fight for Astoria in every community in this district to make sure that we are having more affordable housing built and living in more livable communities. When I was elected to the city council in 2009, I was elected as the first woman and the first Democrat to represent my district. There were no other Democrats willing to challenge the Republicans, but I did, and I won. And on the council, I never forgot who I was fighting for. I fought for those who were underrepresented, the most vulnerable in our community. And I fought against the status quo. When women and people of color were getting discriminated on the fire department, I chaired the Fire and Criminal Justice Committee. I made sure that we brought real fairness and oversight. And today, we're finally seeing a diversification in the fire department. When I was the chair of the committee, I also sounded the alarm on Rikers Island when nobody else in the city was talking about the horrors happening there. And today, it is policy that Rikers Island will soon close. When I left the council, there were far too few women. And I started an organization, 21 in 21, to empower women to run for office. And today, for the first time in history, the city council is led by a female majority. My campaign is for our working families, and I'm proud to have the endorsement of over 21 unions, including the Teachers Union and DC 37. I've also been endorsed by the environmental advocacy group, the League of Conservation Voters. I invite you to join my campaign for a better New York that works for all of our families. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Gonzalez. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having us. I'm an organizer, I'm a tech worker, I'm a native New Yorker, and I'm running because I believe that every New Yorker deserves a dignified life. Growing up, I watched my mom struggle to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Like so many New Yorkers, she worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. She didn't have the family connections, she didn't have a college education. She worked on cleaning houses and sweeping the floor of salons. And that was until she got a union job as a special education paraprofessional. My mom didn't want me to struggle the same way she did, which is why she always emphasized that education was a path to a better life. And when she saw that my local public school was underfunded and overcrowded, she got me a scholarship to attend a private school. And for the first time in my life, I saw the two New Yorks. I saw the New York for the rich, where every opportunity was available and every resource, and the New York that I knew, which was working class and immigrant. Today, we still have those two New Yorks. We also have an Albany that is working to serve the few at the expense of working class New Yorkers like us. We saw that with this legislative budget. We found $1 billion in the budget with a surplus and a Democratic supermajority to fund a $1 billion stadium, but not to fund basic necessities. We didn't fund healthcare, we didn't fund building affordable housing, and we certainly didn't fund any action on climate. Today, Albany is still working for the rich, which is why we cannot trust the same political machine that got us into this mess, and we cannot trust those who are not rooted in our movement. What we need now more than ever are new organizers and leaders who are going to fight and know how to win for our movement. I understand deeply the demands of our movement because I have seen up close how rigged the system is against us. From working in city council, to working in the Obama White House, to working in Senator Schumer's office, and serving on my community board, I know how government works, and I know how to get things done. From organizing in this community on the founding board on the Western Queens Community Land Trust, right here in Long Island City, and also working with the NRG fracked gas power plant to fight them and make sure that we didn't bring power and fossil fuel into this community. I have been doing the work of launching mutual aid efforts and public intranet because I know how to build a coalition and I know how to win and build a movement. We need to make sure that moving forward, we are electing leaders who will do just that, and I am proud to say that this campaign has the most support from over 20 political organizations and community organizations over 16 elected officials, and 10 overlapping right here in Senate District 59. I'm proud to have the support of Senator Mike Gianaris and every elected official right here in Astoria, and I know that together we can build a New York that will work for all of us. So on August 23rd, I hope to earn all of your votes. Thank you.
Hello, Astoria. Hello, neighbors. My name is Nomiki Konst. I am a resident of Astoria. I live over by Vernon Boulevard, but I used to live in what I believe is the heart of Astoria, off of 30th Avenue. I know many of the people in the room. I go to many of your businesses. I frequent your salons and restaurants. Community. So in the old days, when I used to come here as a kid, my father's here. He was the president or the governor of New York State, AHEPA. We used to come here. Well, he would be here every weekend, but I would come here pretty regularly. A lot of those places that we used to go to as a kid, and I know you know this, Richard, are not around. And this is what it means to be part of a community. When you do not have a community that cannot thrive during the worst crises, when you do not have representation from the community, that representation does not understand the struggles of the community, then what is left of New York? I look outside my window from my bedroom, and I see Astoria houses, and I see a 60-foot skyscraper that's being built right in front of me in Manhattan. That is the tale of two cities that has now unfortunately become too cliche. That is a tale of two cities that started because Albany was at a stalemate for at least 10 years and was controlled by Republicans for 40 years by real estate developers and folks who wanted to scam our public schools and transportation out of taxpayer funding for their benefits. 421A just expired, and we're going to talk about this, I know, but this is part of the root of this inequity in this city. So my background, I've been an organizer my whole life. I knocked on doors with my parents when I was a kid, stuffed envelopes when you still did that, licked those envelopes, cut my fingers, did the whole thing that everybody does. I was an environmental activist here in New York. We helped ban fracking 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, with New Yorkers Against Fracking. I was one of Bernie Sanders' his first surrogate. In 2016, I served on the platform committee for the Democratic Party to make it the most progressive platform in the history that now every single Democrat in this country is supposed to sign on to. We were the first to bring up banning fracking, which we did. We were the first to bring up and fight for Medicare for All, which didn't make it, but is almost there in that platform. And it is definitely almost here in New York, now that we have fought the IDC. The IDC was the Independent Democratic Conference that was holding up legislation in Albany due to political deals, money, bigger offices, old political establishment politics. I was there early on, organizing with neighbors, with allies, to fight to end the IDC. Through my reporting work, I covered the IDC from the beginning of the organized efforts on the ground a couple of years ago. Now that the IDC is gone, they have a backlog of issues that the state Senate is trying to address. And as was discussed, some of these major priorities did not make it into the budget. And that is because we continue to put politics and the establishment and political games in front of the issues of the community. I talk to my neighbors, I talk to the local businesses I go to, and I understand just on 30th Avenue, 13 local businesses shuttered when the MTA was shut down. That is why we need community members who understand those issues deeply and fight on the ground early. And then we'll also get on that bus and go to Albany and talk to their community leader who has the door open.
Well, thank you so much.
I didn't get my freaking.
We're going to cover a lot of these subjects later, so we'll be doing that. Okay?
I guess you're next.
Yeah.
Or you cut us off.
Hi. First, thank you so much for, can you hear me, for arranging this so we can all have the opportunity to talk together and try to figure out how to solve the problems. My name is Francoise Olivas. I am not a traditional candidate whatsoever. I actually come from sustainable design and small businesses. But what I have decided to run for office because there is a national movement trying to get more mothers into elected office. Mothers are severely underrepresented. 86% of women become mothers by the time they are 44 in this country. And in Congress, of the women, less than 6% are mothers. So when we talk about the childcare crisis, when we talk about the right to choose, when we talk about education, having the point of view and the lived experience of a mother at the table is necessary. For far too long, mothers and working families have been left behind. And with the current cut to education, $250 million, we are going to continue to see the working families that can afford to leave New York leave. And we have the opportunity right now to change that. I am also a small business owner and I have worked with small businesses for the past 20 years. I was part of a coalition in 2008 that fought to save the Garment Center because
The first couple have to do with transit and transportation. The first one is about expansion of public transit as a goal each of us shares, with two important projects are the Interborough Express and the LaGuardia Air Train. ONA is disappointed that the IBX will not come to Astoria, but will end in Jackson Heights, even though the tracks do go on. We also support an air train connection over the existing Jamaica air train hub and do not support extension of the N line. We'd like your comments on that, starting with Michael.
So yeah, I think the Interborough Express was a great idea by the governor. I too think that it should come to Astoria. I think that would be easy. It makes transit between Brooklyn and Queens that much easier. You know, even though I am a Manhattanite, having to have folks go through Manhattan, I think you know, people need to get places quicker, and I think the Interborough Express is a great idea. But I would also advocate for it to come into Astoria. And as far as the air train, listen, I'm someone who takes flights out of LaGuardia whenever I go because it's the closest airport to where we are. But it usually takes at least 2, if not 3 connections to get there. So I think that that's something that we absolutely need to work on, making sure that the connections, you know, you can get there using a Metro card and it's not separate. I know that we're going to talk about the ferries later, but that's definitely something that I want to talk about. But as far as having an air train, I think that you know, my view as a state senator is I would listen to the community, whatever the community input is, and whatever the community would prefer, whether it be coming on the N train or coming from Jamaica. That's what I would advocate for, because at the end of the day, I'm the community's voice in the project.
Thank you.
I look at transit as an equity issue. Access to transit equals access to opportunity. Upon leaving the council, I was able to get over a $500,000 grant to study the Lower Montauk branch of the Long Island Railroad. It may seem foreign to most people in the room, but it intersects something known as the Bay Ridge Line, which is also known as the Triborough Extension, or now the Interborough Express. So before the governor made that announcement, I had already been leading the way in transit equity, trying to open up the corridor of the Lower Montauk branch, which extends from Long Island City to Jamaica, right through the district I represented. The feasibility study came back saying that it was very possible to use this line for passengers. And the good news there was I started an advocacy group to push for that line as well as the Triborough Extension before the governor announced her support. This project is a no-brainer. It opens up over 20 square miles of transit access to many communities considered transit deserts. Have you ever tried to go to Bay Ridge from Astoria?
Yes.
It takes you half a day. It shouldn't. There are jobs and opportunities all along the right-of-way of both of these lines. And we talk about affordable housing and where we could build affordable housing. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of opportunity along these rights-of-way. So unequivocally, I support putting passenger service on these train lines to better connect Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, because This line should very well go to Astoria, not end in Jackson Heights, and also go over the Hell's Gate Bridge to communities within the Bronx. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I agree with a lot of what's been said. I am a lifelong strap hanger, and so I absolutely support any effort to expand our transit system. The Interborough Express is a great example of policy that works for working class families. It expands to 900,000 families. 7 of the 10 families nearby are people of color. We know that of the 70 to 80,000 people who would be riding the Interborough Express weekly, they would be 1 out of 4 non-English speakers. So the data shows that this is truly a project that's worth investing. It's also a project that generates revenue for our city. It can generate $2 million of revenue a year. So I absolutely agree that this is a no-brainer. On the other hand, though, the air train is not something I have supported in the past, and I do agree that we need to expand all service. But whenever we look at transit policy, it is always first what will support our working class New Yorkers, what will first support our laborers. And what I am really proud to say is that with the MTA being controlled at the state level, expanding transit is a big part of our Green New York platform. We don't only need to expand our service, but we need to make it greener, and we need to make it interconnected. That means interborough, that means ferry, and that also means buses. So I'm proud to work with the folks who are in our coalition to make sure that that happens in Albany.
We've heard this over and over again. Our transit is the lifeblood of the city. Our trains are the lifeblood of the city. And right now, we have an artery clog in this city. For too long, as many of you know, our MTA has been horrifyingly, inhumanely underfunded. And some of that is because some people who sit on our MTA board are real estate executives. They sit there and they say, oh, let's remodel that 30th Avenue line right there and shut down the subway service for 2 years so that they can create, businesses go out of business, people have to move away, and suddenly they can go in there and buy up all this distressed real estate. That is not how our transit system should be run. So number one, and this does relate to the interborough transit system, we need to make sure that this plan has real estate out of it, that they have no part of this, including the part that involves the environmental impact study. We need to know first that this plan has fully gone through all different corners of investigation. I commend Kathy Hochul, Governor Hochul, for putting this forward immediately. I think it was a great step in relation to the previous administration, and it is well overdue, and it is very much about our economy. But with that being said, we need to make sure that the process is overseen, because special interests always find a way to sneak in there and play a little bit here, play a little bit there, and you never really know where that comes from. So as long as the community is involved, we hear their voices as senator, as community members, as long as the environmental impact is fully looked into with air quality and noise quality, and as long as that it's interconnected so it's easier for everyday New Yorkers to transfer, so it's not 3 or 4 transfers, even to the interborough train, and finding a way, even though they said they couldn't do it, to go into the Bronx at Hellgate. Because right now they're saying they can't, but when there's a will, there's a way. So making sure the people at the table making those decisions are part of the community and not part of the real estate industry.
Thank you.
So I do think that this is something that needs to be done, but I think that it also should be, the Bronx should also be a part of it. There are many neighborhoods in this district that are transportation deserts. In the old new 17th district, when I would go from Greenpoint to Richmond Hill on the subway, sometimes it would take me an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that's just unacceptable. The reality is that we do not have the infrastructure to support the development that has been going on in our communities. The one thing, and I know we're going to talk about this, is we really need to start talking about utilizing our waterways as transportation.
Good. Thank you. Thanks to everyone.
But I do want to say, I think that we really do need to talk about noise pollution. I don't think that noise pollution, I think some people think it's a very esoteric thing. Living in Greenpoint on the waterfront, and we're going to talk about 421A and all of that, but noise pollution really can have detrimental effects. It can lead to severe heart conditions. If you're not sleeping properly, it can kill people. And so we need to have that really addressed prior to the completion.
Thank you. Okay, next, and we'll start with Elizabeth. Okay. I'd like to discuss a local issue here in Astoria, and particularly Old Astoria, the bus lanes and the bus lanes on 21st Street. The MTA and the DOT, as part of its new proposed bus service in Queens, are establishing 24/7 bus lanes on 21st Street and eliminating many of the bus stops in the name of efficiency. Oana supports bus lanes operating only during the rush hours, like the avenues in Manhattan, and not eliminating so many bus stops. What is your position on this? And secondly, this removal of bus stops is happening throughout all of Queens with the new bus design that's being rolled out right now. I think that many people are losing their service, and it's. I think it should be relooked at again, but I'd like your comments.
Okay, select bus service, I support select bus service. Back when I was a council member, one of the first projects that happened in the entire city happened to be one that ran from Rockaway, far Rockaway, all the way down Woodhaven Boulevard to Queens Boulevard. And so many politicians were against this. They fought a fight for a very long time. I penned an op-ed with our current borough president, Donovan Richards, then council member, in support of this initiative to benefit not only the residents in Rockaway, but the people who were living along the right-of-way or visiting. And how often do the rest of Queens go out to Rockaway, in the summertime especially? And the traffic all along that boulevard was out of control for many years. And so the bus service was fought by so many as an infringement because of the car culture that we have in our communities. But it costs tens of millions of dollars to install, and it really is, it needs to be looked at as a community investment. Now, I understand your frustration about the 24-hour service, and it may very well turn out that the 24-hour service is not needed. And as your state senator, I will work with your organization and those that feel that it is a waste for 24/7. We'll look at it closely, but no, I am 100% in support of select bus services because it is part of that transit equity access. And it's just more affordable to take the bus instead of driving around. There's too much congestion happening. It's strangling our communities. We need to end the car culture, and this will help do that. Thank you.
Okay.
So, yes. Are we going
Yes.
this way or back?
Yeah, Kristen. Yes.
So I also am supportive of expanding our bus service in the 21st Street line. I will say, though, as before, as someone who is a lifelong strap hanger, when the DOT did a survey of bus riders, 93% of those bus riders said that buses were the main form of their transportation, which means so many of the people who are using this line, it is the only way that they are getting around, or the majority of the time, that is how they're getting around. So we absolutely need to be committed to expanding our bus service. That being said, we need to take it a step further. Honestly, we have the money in the budget to not only expand bus service, but we have the money in the budget to make it fare free. We shouldn't be asking more working New Yorkers to continue to pay prices to go and commute to their jobs. So I do believe in taking it a step further and also ensuring that our bus routes are accessible. I'm also proud to say that as someone who is part of the bus redesign process and left feedback, I saw firsthand that it could be a little bit better. We all have strong opinions, and I do think the MTA needs to have a better system of capturing what works best for our communities in terms of bus lanes. And finally, this is an urgent issue. I know buses tend to be contentious because of, certain roles in the community, but really, it's an important part of what our green future looks like. We know that not only do we need to expand our transit system and that we need to make it green, as I said before, but this is one way that we can move off of cars and move towards renewable energy and a green New York that we all deserve. So this is actually a top of line issue. And again, I am very excited to be able to tackle this with a lot of the folks who are also strap hangers who have been working with us on this issue. So thank you, and also would encourage all of you to go to those redesigns, because I know they're having some additional redesign hearing sessions coming up in the future.
Thank you.
Well, as somebody who has to rely on buses for transportation, I can tell you that where I live, there is one bus an hour, maybe. And then if I can't make that bus, or if it doesn't show up, I then have to walk a half a mile to go to the subway. That is a story for more than 1 in 6 New Yorkers, not 1 in 8. It used to be 1 in 8. The number is now 1 in 6 New Yorkers. Now, Astoria knows this very well because there's development happening along the waterfronts and in a lot of areas of this city that have relied on those very infrequent buses. I'll go back to what I said earlier. So the MTA is severely underfunded. And it's not just that we need to make sure that there is more bus service at regular times, and I understand this is a complicated issue, but we need to make sure that it's accessible to everyone. The 21st Street line, I understand that you have a battle between two communities, some who worry about their parking, understandably so, especially if you do have a green car and you are doing your part to make sure that the environment is protected. But with that being said, it is an inequity issue. And with the overdevelopment in this neighborhood in particular, with the lack of funding towards public transportation, with the infrequent subways that are constant, and people not now traveling interborough, rather than commuting into Manhattan as often with ridership down, we have to rely on these buses more. So funding, accessibility, electrifying the unit, and I do believe that we should do it during rush hour only. I do agree with your solution, because it is a complicated project, and they looked at many different pathways. They had many different hearings. 50 people were on that board. They assessed it. This was not something that was done impulsively. With that being said, it could be tweaked a little bit.
Thank you.
So I do think that this is a good idea. I think one thing to also think about, because buses are so important, is the accessibility of our subway system. So many of our subway systems or subway stops are not accessible. They're not accessible to the elderly. They're not accessible to parents that have carriages that are trying to carry the carriages down, the stairs and all of those intertwining paths underground. So people rely on our buses. It is imperative that the MTA starts to electrify more of our buses. And to be, I'm learning about this part of Astoria as the district changed three weeks ago, so I will be attending those listing sessions and really learning more from what the community wants.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to, sorry, Michael. Another brain freeze.
That's okay. I don't want to belabor this issue because I agree with a lot of what's been said, but I also think that it's also a safety issue. I think anyone who's crossed 21st Street at times, especially during rush hour, sees that 21st Street sometimes feels like an expressway and not a street. And I think that the bus lane, specifically during rush hours, would combat that a little bit. And obviously, whether it be 24 hours, whether it be during rush hour, that's something that I would rely on the community to guide me on that, and that's what I would advocate for.
Thank you. Okay, now I wanted to switch to a different subject now, though we will return to some transit issues, but this has to do with housing. And the first issue I'd like to bring up, which is a big issue in Albany, is good cause eviction. So, please advise your position regarding good cause of eviction. there is a proposed carve-out for owner-occupied buildings. Do you agree with that? Also, currently, the rent increases are based on consumer price index. Should this be based instead on the actual utility, insurance, and maintenance increases of the buildings? And I'd like to start with Kristen.
Yes, so I am absolutely supportive of good cause eviction. I'm a lifelong renter, my family are renters, and I've experienced firsthand how the rising cost of rent are pushing our community out, putting pressure on the working class, and so we need universal rent control. We need to pass good cause eviction. And I also would like to add that we are in a housing crisis, that we are a day after the Rent Guidelines Board and City Council decided to allow us to raise our rents by 3% for a year, 5% for 2 years, and that is unacceptable. We're still recovering. We're still in the midst of a global health pandemic. And so unequivocally in this campaign, housing is a human right, and good cause eviction is an important step towards that. In addition, Senator Julia Salazar, the author of this bill, is someone who has been working with our campaign, endorses our campaign, and we were up in Albany at the end of the legislative session advocating for and lobbying for good cause eviction, because I believe in doing the work, and we need to build a housing movement in order to counter the housing crisis and rising rents. So I look forward to, again, being a candidate that is working diligently on improving conditions for renters, on ensuring that we have universal protections for our renters, and also increasing all of the not only protections, but increasing the amount of affordable housing that we have here, right here in the city. Thank you.
It is shameful that the market is setting the cost of our rent, especially since we are still dealing with the consequences of this pandemic. As we're all on stage right now, as you have a child who still can't be vaccinated, I have an immunocompromised mother here, we are still facing the consequences of this pandemic, and yet rents have gone up 33% in 1 year. And it is horrifying, it is criminal that rent-stabilized apartments now are going to see increases given the effects of this pandemic, the economic effects, the health effects, and of course, the personal effects, how it's changed the way we work, how it's changed the way we commute. Real estate has a stranglehold not just on our city, but on our state. Good cause eviction is something that I've supported for many years. It is something that has been championed by community groups for, at this point, decades. It is well past time that it is passed. It's a shame that it is not passed here. It's being passed in other cities. Kingston, Hudson, Newburgh, Poughkeepsie are just a few, Albany, are just a few cities in New York State that have good cause eviction. But there are other communities in this state right now that are trying to neutralize efforts here because they are more conservative. And they are trying to block our ability to make change in New York. So I hope, as a senator, I will be there with other Democratic senators fighting for good cause eviction in Albany in the next Senate session, because we were able to defeat the IDC. We can now have this on the table, and thank you to the groups that have been putting in this work for, at this point, decades. But the pressure really needs to happen urgently, especially in the face of this pandemic, and especially in face of the egregious effects of the real estate industry setting the prices of our apartments. This is a speculative market. Speculative markets are bubbles. When bubbles burst, it hurts everybody. It hurts everybody. And that's what we're dealing with right now, and it has to end.
So I think we all are probably in agreement that this is a piece of legislation that needs to pass, but I also think that this is a multifaceted issue of affordable housing. We need to also be addressing the amount of Airbnbs in New York City. There are more Airbnbs than there are apartments for rent. And this is unacceptable. We need to put the residents of New York City first.
Thank you.
So one of the first bills I would co-sponsor as your new state senator would be Senator Salazar's bill for good cause eviction. And as someone who's a rent-stabilized tenant currently, The decision yesterday was rough. You know, when my new lease comes up, you know, it's going to be a lot of belt tightening, and prices are going up for groceries and for other things that it's going to be very hard for myself and for 2.4 million New York City residents who are affected by the decision of the Rent Guidelines Board. So good cause eviction, it's just good policy when it comes down to it. And I think it is important that we do this in the midst of the pandemic. If you look at my 9-apartment building that I've lived in my entire life, 5 of the apartments were vacant at one point or another throughout the pandemic. And by the way, looking them up online to see what they were listing for, $3,000 or more. That's just insane for the amount of space in those apartments. So I absolutely would want to work with senators from all across the state. Senators like my friends James Skoufis and Elijah Reichling-Melnick from upstate, both of who've endorsed me. Folks that I came up with in Young Democrats like Michelle Hinchy and Andrew Gennardis and Jeremy Cooney. The point is, you got to have a coalition throughout the entire state to make them understand the crisis that's going on here in New York City. So that's the coalition that I would work with. Again, very supportive, would sign on to the bill day one as soon as I'm in the Senate.
I too support good cause eviction. I'm a tenant advocate. In addition to the skyrocketing rent increases for market rate housing, yes, Nomiki had said it, over 30% in 1 year. Can you imagine being a mother, having a family, living in an apartment for a number of years, and then for no reason at all, your landlord could just evict you? Tenants need more rights in this state. And not just cities throughout our state have passed this, but states. We've seen it work in New Jersey, our neighbor, and we've seen it work in California. Tenants need this protection, and we need to do more, especially to build real affordable housing. And so I look forward to this continued conversation, and know that I am 100% committed to this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, again, has to do with housing, and this is concerning our NYCHA campuses. We have 3 locally here on the waterfront area, and they're a very important part of our community. And I also like to briefly say thanks for Claudia Koger being here, the ex-president of the Astoria Residents Association. Thank you, Claudia. And thanks for being on our board. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you. On that, what is your position on NYCHA campuses? Should private funding be accepted in order to maintain the facilities, or we should continue the current public funding structure? And what do you think has led to the many inefficiencies that have caused so many issues recently on the NYCHA campuses?
For decades, NYCHA has been underfunded, and I'll just keep saying this, criminally underfunded, not just by the state, but by the federal government. And when funds are released, NYCHA residents who I've interviewed in documentaries as a journalist have repeatedly said over and over that they put in a complaint over their stove being broken, and 2 years go by and it's not replaced, or they don't take out the old stove, or the lead paint crisis, which has been erased from the front pages of the New York tabloids. You know, used to be an issue people cared about, but there are children now with developmental issues because there's lead chips still in our public housing. The solutions are not complicated. The money is there. It is not being allocated properly. It is not being dispersed. Bureaucracy is getting in the way. This is 1 in 8 New Yorkers. This is the size of the city of Boston. The fact that we do not prioritize funding public housing in this city is criminal. Now, does that mean that there should be private funding available? I understand why this legislation was put forward. Do I agree with it entirely? No, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that we have to be taxing, now that 421A is gone, we should be taxing the people who are scamming our city for their benefits, for their ability to make money. That money should have been going to NYCHA, it should have been going to public transportation, it should have been going to infrastructure, it should have been going to our public schools. But NYCHA has been in crisis for decades. We know the solutions, we know how to get it. The thing that stands in the way are the interests that have blocked it throughout the process, blocked the money being raised. And we know what that is these developers. Just all roads lead back to real estate developers not wanting to pay taxes, to overdevelop our communities, create speculative markets, push people out. This is called starvation. It is disaster capitalism. This is a design that is used all over the planet to make sure people leave a community so rich folks can come in and profit. The money is there.
So I'll jump off of that. And the money is there. We need to fund NYCHA, period. The privatization of NYCHA developments is not working. I was on the front lines of the pandemic in food insecurity. And on every Wednesday, we were in Taylor Wythe in Williamsburg. And I would talk to the tenants who were in line for food, and they would tell me about what was going on. It's disgusting what the privatization was doing, what they were doing to our elders in these communities. What we need are elected officials who are going to stand up to developers and who are going to say, this is not okay. We have to put the residents of New York City, but also of NYCHA first. We have to fund NYCHA. And the privatization just leads to more greed. And I want to also tell the story of a senior that I worked with who came into the senior center at 9 o'clock. She was there at 10:10 every day, but this Monday she came in at 9 a.m. And I asked her why she was there so early. And she said, because I have not had heat or hot water for 4 days. And I asked her why she didn't tell me on Thursday, because I could have made some phone calls. I could have advocated for her. And her response was, this has been going on for decades. I am used to not having heat or hot water. This is New York City. This is New York State. We can and must do better.
So I have a lot to say about this. I hope I can get this in 2 minutes, and if I can, I'll talk to y'all afterwards. I think private funding is a very slippery slope. I'm very cautious as to whether or not that's the answer. I don't think it's the answer. I think that we just need to be doing more as your elected officials to making sure that funding is coming to NYCHA. And listen, anyone at Astoria Housing will tell you, Claudia Koger will tell you that, you know, throughout the pandemic, as I mentioned before, gas was out. NYCHA's fix to that, give them a hot plate. How are you supposed to cook food for your family on a hot plate? And I'm not just speaking as someone who has seen this happen. I'm speaking as someone who had this happen as a rent-stabilized tenant. I had my gas out for 10 months. And that was the same answer I got from my landlord, use a hot plate. Now, you know, we got by for 10 months. And by the way, 10 months is on the lower end of time that it takes people to fix gas. And folks at NYCHA know that more than anything else. And I think there are simple answers here. And I'm going to politely steal it from my former boss with his permission, with some fixes he brought up during the borough president's race. I think that we should put solar on top of all of NYCHA. And if we're going to do that, by the way, let's not sell that away. Let's make sure that actually powers the building for the tenants first. And if there's leftover energy, that's fine. We can figure out a way to bring back money into NYCHA for that. But number one, that should be powering the buildings. And let's make sure all of the stoves in NYCHA are electric stoves, because that takes away the ability of, if the gas is out for 10 months, cook on a hot plate. No, that's not the right answer. Let's actually find the money and make sure that we can electrify the stoves and use the solar panels on the top of the buildings to power it, so that you don't have to worry about when the power goes out, especially as anyone from NYCHA over here in Hallett's Cove will tell you, like what happened in 2012 during Superstorm Sandy.
I believe public housing should remain public. We have the largest public housing community here in the district in Queensbridge. We have Ravenswood, Astoria houses. There's many other housing developments throughout the district. Unfortunately, when Mayor de Blasio was the mayor, he allowed 40% of public housing to get privatized. I have great concern for the residents in those various different developments because their landlords are not going to be as responsive as the current landlord and as bad as the current landlord is. The only way I would support any level of privatization is if the residents who live within the developments come up with a plan to buy the units themselves. This has happened in other municipalities. In Boston, it's worked, it's shown to work. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the communities around public housing, anyone who owned property, they've seen a great amount of, they've been able to see great profits. And the division of rich and poor has grown way too wide in the city. There's no longer middle class or middle class housing. That's what public housing was meant to be, built for our working families. And so in addition to supporting not only keeping public housing public, but exploring an opportunity that if the units were to privatize, it would be the residents who would gain the equity in those units and the value. I am also in support of real affordable housing that is government funded, and it is housing that we have not seen built in generations. Thank you.
NYCHA is an issue that's really personal to me. I have a lot of family that lives in NYCHA housing in Manhattan. I spent a significant amount of time in NYCHA as a child. I know what it feels like to see the literal apartment crumbling around you and feel like no one cares and that you are being overlooked and underserved. So I am really excited actually to hear from my, from this group of candidates that we share the democratic socialist sentiment that we need to keep public land in public hands, that we need to fully fund NYCHA and push back on attempts to privatize it, and that the money is there in the state budget and that we have an obligation to do so because how we treat the most vulnerable among us is really a representation of our priorities as a state and as a society. And so with the average income of NYCHA residents being $20,000, we know that we need to protect NYCHA. We know we need to support our low-income Black and brown New Yorkers. And we also have heard a lot, not only about the crumbling infrastructure, which is true, and that the money that's needed there, but we know that we need a better system where NYCHA residents have more accountability and governance. And we also know that the reason that this has been met with resistance in Albany is because so many of our leaders are bought out by real estate. And that's why this campaign, my campaign, does not accept any money from real estate developers. Because to be truly accountable to renters, be truly accountable to those in NYCHA, and especially with this district having the largest NYCHA complex in the country, that we cannot take a dollar of real estate money. So I'm really excited to continue working. I've been canvassing in NYCHA. We hear it again and again. We need an immediate solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and speaking of that, the next subject will be on housing affordability. It's one of the most important aspects on quality of life. Do you think the government should provide subsidies for affordability, such as the 421A and the MIH programs, or should all funding be controlled by the private sector, keeping in mind that without an acceptable rate of return, many banks and private funders shy away from funding affordable housing developers, especially when they're trying to develop on private land? And also, what role does supply and demand take in keeping rents affordable?
Can you say it again?
Okay, let me start that one more
Get
time.
it answered
Okay.
in 2 minutes. So.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, all right. Housing affordability is one of the most important aspects in quality of life. Do you think the government should provide subsidies for affordability, such as the 421A and MIH programs? Or should all funding be through the private sector, keeping in mind that without an acceptable rate of return, many banks and private funders shy away from funding affordable housing developers, especially on private land? Also, what role does supply and demand take in keeping rents affordable?
I mean, so with supply and demand, I'm really going to quickly go back to, we have to get Airbnbs off the market in New York City. I think that would really change things. In terms of 421A, it was a great concept. It was a great idea. That's really not working. I will go to Greenpoint. That's what I know best. If you walk along our waterfront, and I invite all the other candidates to please do this, you will see how 421A has been used to build segregation into our communities. It's not just a pour door. It is a separate building. And this allows private developers not to care about what's going on there. Last week, I walked a neighbor to an elected's office, which was closed, and because they were getting evicted, they have been holding 1/3 of their rent in escrow because this building, which is 4 years old, is falling apart. It is falling apart. We have had glass fall onto the sidewalk, almost killing somebody. So I think we have to honestly get into a room and really hash out what affordable housing looks like. And I think we also need to bring back the Mitchell-Lama style, where people can actually buy housing and can go out of being a renter to being a homeowner, because that will allow working families to stay here.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Francoise said. 421A was broken, and we need a new solution. But we also need to build, mostly because our housing stock is old. We need more units. When Richard talked about supply and demand, that's part of the problem. We need more units to drive down the cost of rent. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where you got the Rent Guidelines Board doing what they did yesterday. We need to make sure this housing is built, and by the way, we need to make sure it's built union. Make sure good union jobs are used to build these housing. And true affordable housing, I know Kristen mentioned it before, rent control, that's something we need to bring back. The apartment that I got, my parents got that apartment in 1974. They just missed out on rent control by a couple of years. I'm still lucky enough to live in that apartment today, but again, there are folks that had apartments from back in the 60s, and they were truly affordable for working families and for senior citizens as they got older. So that's what we need to bring back here in New York State, and I would totally be in favor of a new solution because 421A was just simply not working.
This district includes Stuytown, which when it was built, and still today, is the largest middle-class, privately owned and funded affordable housing complex in the entire country. And in the entire country. And this happened in the late 1940s. It wasn't that long ago. And Parkchester in the Bronx was built. We're talking about housing that is there to support over 30,000 people. We need to build units like that again. We have to find the most affordable. Yes, it's important to build union jobs, but we need to find a way to reduce the cost of construction and to open more opportunities also, as Francoise said, for home ownership. I believe in that American dream, and it is just not unobtainable for too many in our communities. There's a way, it's happened before, that you could work with private industry to build real affordable housing. It has not worked. It's not working in the waterfront in Greenpoint. It's not working in the waterfront community in Long Island City. It's not working in Hallett's Cove. Those luxury apartment buildings are rising, making all the rents all around the community increase, and are pushing our families out of New York City. And we're no longer the middle class or the working class New York we once were. We have to put an end to this. And that is why we're in this housing emergency that we have to get out. And I'm committed to getting us out of this housing emergency. Thank you.
So 421A, as you know, several of us have mentioned, is a failed program. We need to absolutely repeal it. Right now, I know it is ending. We have 485W, which is essentially the same thing. So to be very clear at the beginning of this, we are not supportive of 421A in this campaign. We can't keep subsidizing luxury developers without actually funding our communities. I'd also like to say, again, as a renter, as someone who believes that housing is a human right, that we need to reject the myth that we can just simply build our way or leave this to the private sector to build our way out of our housing crisis. We know that the way that affordable housing is calculated now in the AMI, and I saw this as someone who served on my community board and saw the Euler process fail us, that it is not affordable medium income, isn't representative of our communities. And we need to not only redefine that system, but we need to not settle for the bare minimum. Oftentimes, luxury developments will say they will give us 25% of affordable units, but those affordable units are not actually affordable for the surrounding community. And the rest of those units certainly are not at market rates of, for example, over $3,000 for a studio. And we saw that with Innovation Queens as well. Another development that was voted down by the board last night, and we're excited to say that tried to sell us that very lie. So we need to not only reject that lie, we need to demand 100% affordable housing in this state, in this city, and we cannot stop until housing is afforded as a basic human dignity, because we do have more vacant apartments in this city than folks who are actually homeless, and that needs to change now.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
hello.
Sorry, I was waiting for you to start.
I'm a little short. It's okay. First, it's my name. Then, no, I'm kidding. So 421A came out of a crisis. You know, New York go broke. They were scrapping for funds. They were trying to look for it. I get it. I get why people bought into this. But we know what happens now. It's been 40 years. We know what the effects of 421A are. Trump, before 421A, Donald Trump's first real estate deal was a mini 421A. We should have learned then. He bought off politicians to get that deal illegally by the process of the city, so he could get his first real estate deal and then replicate it all over New York City. Now, if you look at the city, the skyline, I think a lot of us say, okay, there's developments everywhere, but how many of those apartments are empty? For purchased apartments, in the last, since the economic crash of 2008, over 70% of the apartments in New York City and Manhattan that have been purchased have been from LLCs. Many of those LLCs have housed money from oligarchs trying to hide their money. So literally, a banking scam is affecting all of our housing because people were pushed out of the city, and more renters are coming into outer boroughs, gentrifying other neighborhoods. Now, when you look at Long Island City or Greenpoint, we see those high rises, those 55, 60 foot, 70 feet high rises with empty apartments everywhere, nowhere near capacity. 421A needs to end. Anything that looks like it needs to end. We know the effects, we know the design is flawed, but also what happens is, you know, affordable housing, yeah, people say we need to build it. We have it! It's empty! Seize it! Cities have done this all over the world. London is doing it right now. This isn't a foreign concept. You have empty apartments all over this city. You have rental apartments that are not at occupancy. And yet these developers keep coming to our community boards and saying, we want to build more. Here's our next gimmick. Oh, we're going to build, I heard last night, a pocket park. What the F is a pocket park? That's like an Elon Musk design. They come up with a new gimmick every time, but we know what the consequences are. We're seeing it, we're feeling it. Everything is underfunded, NYCHA is starved, our public transportation is starved, our small businesses are shutting down, people are forced out of their, evicted. The next crisis is gonna cause an even bigger crisis. These tax breaks have to end. The housing is there, we need to pull from it, and we need to make sure that the affordable housing is truly affordable, $3,000 a month for a studio apartment. Are you kidding me? I was talking to those union workers yesterday who came to our side and started chanting against Innovative Queens once we said, do you think a studio apartment at $3,000 is affordable? He said, no. I said, how many jobs do you think are going to come with this project? He said, well, we were told tens of thousands. I said, I'd like to see it in writing. Did you know that this was, the people behind this were lobbyists, very, very well-funded lobbyists? No, I had no idea. When people know, they're against it. Well, we know now. 421A and anything that looks like it needs to stop.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's the first section of our forum. So what's
What you said, 8:30?
I'm just going to ask
Okay.
right now, 8:30, I need to call my daughter,
Oh,
and I need to
okay.
say goodnight.
Okay.
So if we're still going, can we please,
it's 8:16 now.
Love you, but we.
we can all just FaceTime her.
What I was going to do, okay, well, no, what I was going to do was to have the lightning session now. Now, if you don't want to do that, feel free to leave, okay?
No, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. All right.
We need that Interborough Express for you to get home.
Okay. What I was looking at is having a section where I just want to have quick answers as fast as we can to cover a few different subjects. Okay. First of all, the first question is integration of the New York State ferry system into the MTA and providing first and last mile capabilities. Do you agree that they should be integrated now that you would be in the Senate and working with the MTA?
Absolutely. I should be able to use a Metro card to get on a ferry.
I too agree, and I think we need to expand the bus services. That we only have one on 34th Street, another one in Rockaway. We need more, connecting all our ferries to bus service.
Definitely agree. And also want to congratulate the folks right here in this organization that fought to expand ferry service from Astoria to the Upper East Side. I can tell you it's hard to get around this Triborough district, and we definitely need more of that.
I live across the street from the ferry. I can tell you it is wonderful by design, but we do know that the majority of people who use the ferries right now are people of privilege and tourists. So the fact that we have a ferry stop in Astoria next to one of the largest public housing in the city is ridiculous that it's not being used. It needs to be accessible to everybody who has a Metro card and fair fares, to be part of the fair fares program. I mean, this is something, frankly, I think all public transportation should be free and the money is there, but in the meantime, at least make it accessible to people who use fair fares.
So I think, in Greenpoint, our ferry has been down for about a year. And it has been impossible for people, it's been impossible for people who have disabilities or families to travel. And because it does bring tourists, it has also affected our small businesses. So I think the ferry system needs to be expanded. I think we should look at places like Hong Kong or even in Guatemala around Lake Atitlan, where they have tiny little ferries that operate all the time. We have a waterway right here, and let's use it.
Next question. Basement apartments, should they be legalized?
That's a tricky question. We saw 8 people killed, maybe even more. Far too many. One is too many. Just this year, when we had Hurricane Ida, I believe that was in September. We need to do more to build safe and affordable housing, and I'm concerned about the basement apartments because they're already getting rented out, and they are a hazard for many of the people living in them.
Yes, absolutely. This is an intersection of the housing crisis, the climate crisis, and also our failure to serve immigrant New Yorkers. We had 18 New Yorkers who passed away during Hurricane Ida. They were immigrants. They were our neighbors here in Queens. So we absolutely need to do more to protect the housing crisis and create affordable housing, green infrastructure that protects them against flooding, while also supporting landlords and making sure that those basements are safe, especially if landlords are struggling with those costs. And then finally, we need to work to support our immigrant New Yorkers, for example, working with a few members we've been, which is Make the Road, New York Immigration Coalition, and New York Communities for Change.
Many people who rent basement apartments are doing so because they're shut out of the system in which qualifying for regular rent. So it is why so many new New Yorkers, immigrants, are unable to enter the regular housing market because there's a bureaucratic process. Some of it is based on credit, and some of it is based on just the bureaucracy of accessing affordable housing in this city. basement apartments are an effect of all of the crises that we face. Now, if people are going to rent basement apartments, they should be highly regulated, and landlords should be equipped with the funds, the resources to make sure that those basement apartments are safe. With that being said, climate is real, and most of us are on the front lines right now of climate change, and we do have to adapt. Now, how do we adapt for a basement apartment when a flood comes in? How do we adapt when the subway starts flooding, when these issues were not in our climate plans 5 years ago? So our climate plans and our preparation needs to speed up beyond just electrifying, cutting off the gas grid, as we've discussed before. We really need to talk about what it means to be on the front lines of climate change in an aggressive and serious way, so much so that there should be hearings in the Senate next session.
So I agree with Liz. I think this is a very complicated question. We are a coastal community, every aspect of it, and our basements flood when it rains. We get 2 days of rain, and there are people who are pumping 3 feet of water out of their basements. So if people are going to live in basements, yes, it does have to be regulated. But also in Greenpoint, we have Superfund sites. We have a neighbor who was living in a legal basement apartment, and she had such toxic fumes that she was hospitalized and ended up with cancer. So it's complicated, and we really need to have a conversation about what is going to make it safe. And if the legislation is going to pass, especially in areas that have very toxic things under the ground, we need to also be looking at air quality.
Okay.
So I do agree that safety is a concern, and considering how many people died during Ida, I think that we need to keep that in mind. That said, I'm excited to support the bill that has been put forth by my former assembly member and would-be senator to the south in the Manhattan part, Brian Kavanaugh, and my current assembly member, Harvey Epstein, to make sure that there's another source of affordable housing. It's also potentially a revenue source for middle-class homeowners who have some extra space and could use a little bit of extra money. But again, safety is paramount. We need to make sure these apartments are safe, but it does provide affordable housing and would help middle-class homeowners.
Okay. Now. Excuse me.
Am I in trouble? We were laughing at your joke.
Thank you. Okay. This will be the last question. Okay. Applause, please. Okay. Okay. Redistricting. The existing statute created the redistricting commission that is flawed. What would you do to fix the current system?
I think it's your turn.
I feel like I haven't been respecting the lightning round element of this. So I will say that we need to revamp, we need a more democratic process, and that we certainly did not get lines that represent our community interests. So we need to do better and have a more democratic process.
Thank you.
That old line about democracy, it sucks basically, but what's better? We have a redistricting situation in New York State that is far better than most of the countries, because let's look at other parts of the country where the Koch brothers have flooded the states to take over their legislatures. We need a truly independent redistricting process in this state, but we also need to be prepared for what happened this time around, where conservatives decided to pick a community in upstate New York with a judge that would be friendly to them, and here we are now all running for District 59, which used to be in Western New York. So, it's politics. Politics is always going to find its way through our democracy. We need a truly, truly independent redistricting commission that reflects how communities are changing very quickly. And with that being said, we need to do a better part with our census. I mean, I think we saw what happened with the census process. Granted, some of it was because of the pandemic and accessibility to folks, but do I have the answers right now? No, but there are people out there who have spent decades on this to make sure that we have equitable community representation.
So so in 2014, there was a ballot measure that we as New Yorkers voted on so that there would be an independent commission to do the redistricting. The reason why we are in this mess is because all of our current legislatures, except for 2 in the Assembly and 1 or 2 in the Senate, did not follow the constitutional amendment of New York State. So we can try to blame it on the Republicans, and I blame them for a lot of things, but unfortunately, this is not one. This is our current legislatures not understanding and following the constitutional amendment that we voted on in 2014. It is a disgrace that this had to happen. All they had to do was go back to the independent commission and say, you know what, this isn't working for us. And then they would have redrawn the maps. But no, they voted on it. It was illegal because it was against the Constitution of our state. And I think it's something we really need to think about when we are going to vote this week and in August, that we have legislatures that did not follow our Constitution. It's right there in the instructions. Follow it.
So I think we need to stop calling this farce an independent redistricting commission and start calling it a bipartisan redistricting commission, because that's exactly what it was. Especially when you had a vice chair of the redistricting commission trying to carve himself out a state senate seat in Long Island. You know, please tell your friends to vote against Jack Martins. And I think that we need to do better. I think another thing we need to do better, it's like Tip O'Neill said, the former Speaker of the House, all politics is local. Make sure when you vote on Tuesday, you vote for good judges, because those judges will eventually become the judges of the appeals court. And I can tell you that if we had a couple better justices on the appeals court, well, I'm also not sitting here because, let's be honest, because of this redistricting, I am sitting here. So this is me saying that with that in mind. But I think we have an upholding of the lines, even though, granted, I agree with Francoise, the amendment wasn't followed to the letter of the law. But we need to do better, and we need to stop calling it independent, because it's just simply not.
For this one, I agree with both Mike and Francoise, and a lot of what was said by my other colleagues here who are running for Senate. The commission was not independent, and they did not follow the rules. We voted for this measure for independent redistricting commission. I think we need to go back to the drawing board, because the members are really, currently the way the law is written, appointed by the leadership, whether it be the majority leaders or the minority leaders in state government. And are they truly independent? And that is a question we don't know. We really don't. We haven't seen much independence. And, you know, not to be pessimistic here, we also need to have an unequal number of people on the board so the measure pass. And so I would support a whole new law. I would support people running to do this, you know, so they were picked by the parties. You know, Democrats come out and vote for 5 people, Republicans come out and vote for 5 people, and then we get some type of judge that doesn't have a party affiliation, independent of no party, to be there just in case we cannot get a majority vote.
So long as it's not Janet DiFiore.
Okay, thank you very much, okay. One thing to think about too is just the simple concept of an odd number on the commission, so that you don't, in fact, have any chance of, at this point, there's no way in the world that this would have gone through. It was a scam from the beginning.
Well, and the assembly lines are probably going to now have to get redrawn. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, next season.
Yeah, a lot of money wasted. $30 million for a second election, at least.
I mean, it's 30 to 40 million, yeah.
Yeah,
30 to
I believe it's probably going to be more than 40 million.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you guys for joining us. If you'd like to make a brief statement before we leave, we'd like to start with Mike.
Let's go now.
Okay, Francoise, okay.
I'm happy to go last.
You're the only bad.
So, I mean, I to the table. As a small business owner and someone who has worked with thousands and thousands of small businesses, who has fought to keep manufacturing in New York, this is what we need in our city and in our state right now. We need to be talking about the makers movement, and it is something that I have been doing for over a decade. It's also imperative to have the point of view of a pandemic parent at the table who can negotiate for our small children and for our families. I am not a traditional candidate. I do not have a political upbringing, but what I do have is a unique voice. You know, one of the reasons why housing is so important to me, today is actually the anniversary of my father's death. And after he died, we were homeless for 3 months. And that is what I am going to fight for. I am going to fight for every New Yorker to have their voice at the table.
Before this pandemic, and I'm so happy you brought that up because we are in this pandemic, before it, New York had the greatest inequity in this country. We generate more wealth than really anywhere else on this planet. Yet, we have more inequity than anywhere else in a modern democratic city. And if this were a country, which with our budget could be, and our population, exactly, we would have the worst inequality. Then the pandemic hits. Then rents go up. Communities are being driven out. To me, this is about a community. I live in this community. I feel the pain of so many of our neighbors, and I think that's why it's so important to have somebody rooted in the community, but also with the experience of taking on very, very big interests. My career started as an activist. I was national co-chair for President Obama in 2012. I can't believe it's been that long now. I worked on the Bernie Sanders 2016 and 2020 campaign. Now, those were very serious campaigns against the establishment and big interests. We are facing a crisis against big interests right now, but New Yorkers have been able to organize against big interests, especially in the last 10 years, taking on the IDC, very early on taking them on. My work as a reporter, an investigative reporter over the last decade, whether it's doing a documentary on Puerto Rico and the exodus that people are facing in Puerto Rico because of tax breaks, illegal tax breaks, and the disbursement of people who have to leave their community. These are the crises that we are facing across this country, but in Astoria in particular. We have the largest public housing in this district, and we have the fastest growing city in America in this district. But that fastest growing city in America, Long Island City, is full of developments that are not at capacity. They're being funded, yet the largest public housing in this country is not being funded. There are major interests at play here. It is not time to play around politics. It is time to get things done, to take on these interests, organize community members, have those relationships going in Albany on day one to work with those allies. But it really does take a level of perseverance, fight, and courage to take on the man to win, because that's what's happening right now. It is big money.
Thank you all so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversations we have tonight, and I think we all agree that the stakes are incredibly high. There are 3 things at play here. I agree that we need people with lived experience. As someone who was born and raised here in Queens, who's the daughter of working class immigrants, I understand that. But I also think that in order to have an effective legislator, you need to have a coalition and a movement behind you, and you need to be accountable. And that is what we've seen tonight. In every single issue we've talked about, I have done the work. In housing, we have fought in Albany to pass good cause eviction. Around climate, we have fought to pass the Build Public Renewables Act. My campaign is composed of people who have been fighting across this district, whether it's for public land in Long Island City or against the frack gas power plants right here in Astoria, and won. We know we have the coalition and movement backing us, and we know we have the political power behind us with almost every overlapping elected endorsing us, including every elected right here in Astoria. And then finally, accountability is important because we need to ensure that not only as a campaign that's not taking any real estate money, that's not taking any corporate money, that's not taking any fossil fuel money, that we are 100% accountable to the movement that put us here. Because what we need is not only legislators who are going to fight for our community, but legislators who will not be bought out, legislators who will be present in this neighborhood, how we have been present in the housing justice movement, how we have been present in the climate movement, how we have been present in every single battle here in Astoria and across Senate District 59. So thank you. I know we can deliver the New York for the dignified New York for every single working class New Yorker. Thank you all.
As an experienced council member who fought against a Republican in a Republican district to be elected as the first woman and the first Democrat, I fought somebody who was a pro-life Republican and took him out of the city council. I continued to fight for the working person every day that I worked as an elected official and got results. I took on the fire department when they were discriminating against women, and today we have quadrupled the number of women in the fire department. I sounded the alarm on Rikers Island, which is the greatest civil rights issue our city is facing right now, and was then when nobody else was talking about it. I drove a for-profit prison provider off the island that was literally letting New Yorkers die. I led the fight in New York City to raise the age with a young person be charged as a criminal to 18. Those are equity issues that I've fought for and was able to get results for the people of the city of New York. I am committed to representing every community in this district. I know, as I said earlier, the battles that our families are facing right now, because as a young mom, I lived them. And there's no greater concern right now than affordability and the cost of living. And that has everything to do with affordable housing. The transit plan that I spearheaded as a council member, I'll end on that, is now part of the governor's policy. That will transform so many communities in Brooklyn and Queens, and that is powerful. Please join my campaign. I know we can make a difference for working families. Thank you.
So thanks again to the Old Astoria Neighborhood Association for hosting this forum. Look, when it comes down to it, it's about delivering the goods and making sure you get the job done. And that's what I did for 5.5 years working in this community, having the honor of working for Councilmember Constantinides. We brought resources to NYCHA at Astoria houses, passed Local Law 97, the largest carbon emissions reduction in any major city ever. We also passed, before Councilmember Constantinides left, renewable Rikers to make sure that Rikers Island is actually used for public good. Putting a wastewater treatment plant on there, 100 acres of solar, anaerobic digestion. These are all climate priorities that we got done. And that's what I want to do for the district that I've lived in my entire life. And I may live across the river, but the troubles on that side of the river are the same troubles that we have on this side of the river. We're one community. And I want to make sure that the person who represents has shown that they can get the job done, and that's something I have. So I encourage you to take a look at what I've done, take a look at what I'm hoping to do, and remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Thank you very much.
Please, guys, stand up. Good. Okay, and I'd like to have everybody thank the candidates for joining us. Okay. I know that, and I'm sorry for some of the glitches tonight that we had. This is our first time back live, but we're working on it. It's a work in progress. And we want everybody to go upstairs afterwards. There's a lot of food left, so please take it home with you. Please do, okay? Well, it seems that I would do that, but only if they agree to stay, because I was getting the impression that it was too late. Would you agree to stay for questions?
I don't think it's fair if not every candidate can stay. It's for good reason.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry that we ran over time on that, but Anyways, I hope to see everybody soon. Have a great summer, okay? And we'll see everybody in the fall. Thank you.